I believe our best people read them nowadays. And don't jump too fast to the idea that Holmes is a killer. He didn't kill Mrs. Lancaster. That's sure. It's just possible that he has had all along a pretty shrewd idea of where that money is, and that as it's heavy stuff he had a motive in taking the car today. Although even that's curious. He takes a conspicuous limousine and wears a uniform. Now if a fellow wants to get away with something like that he generally does it at night, and as inconspicuously as he can. Still, now let's start with this crescent, beginning at the gate. This Jim Wellington, he was a nephew of Mrs. Lancaster's, isn't that it? Of her first husband. He and George Talbot are cousins. Of course his uncle has been dead so long that we always think of Mrs. Lancaster as his real aunt. Jim's mother was a Talbot. Humphrey. Pretty well related, all of you, aren't you? We are not. Or the Daltons. All right. Let's get back to the Wellingtons. He's an orphan, I suppose? Yes. His mother died 10 years ago. She was rather queer, but Jim isn't, of course. How was she queer? I don't exactly know, I said vaguely. She was very religious, if that's queer. And I remember that she walked a good bit, and talked to herself. She frightened me when I was a little girl. But she was all right otherwise. She was a very intelligent woman really. It seems rather awful, Inspector, to talk about people like this. She was really very kind. She gave a great deal to charity. He nodded. Well, queer or not, she's dead and out of it. I suppose you know Wellington has refused to profit by his aunt's will? Must have money of his own, eh? He has a good income, but of course. He has an extravagant wife. But, all sentiment aside, you don't think Jim Wellington would steal and kill? That's it, isn't it? I'm sure of it. Well, he simply hasn't that sort of courage, if you call it courage, Inspector. I gather you didn't always feel that way about him. I could feel my color rising. That has nothing to do with it. He sat forward in his chair. Why didn't you marry him, Miss Hall? That isn't an impertinent question. There must have been a reason. I couldn't leave my mother all alone. And she objected? Why? Because his mother was what you call queer? No. But you see, she had felt my father's death very deeply, and of course, as a good daughter, you made your sacrifice. Well, it takes all sorts to make a world. Now let's move on. The Daltons related to anyone here? No.